Welcome back to Strange States of America. This week we are going back to the southeast and visiting Arkansas. So grab your bags and let's go.
America is a wide and vast country filled with people, most importantly stories. The stories that linger in the town spread as well as the people did. Welcome to Strange States of America.
Arkansas is a landlocked state in the south-central region of the southern United States. It is bordered by Missouri to the north, Tennessee and Mississippi to the east, Louisiana to the south. Sorry. Texas to the southwest, Oklahoma to the west. Its name is from the Osage language, I'm going to butcher this, sorry y'all, Dehigaha Sowinian language, and referred to their relatives, the Quapaw people. The state's diverse geography ranges from the mountainous regions of the Ozark and the Cacheta Mountains, which make up the U.S. interior highlands, to the densely forested land in the south known as the Arkansas Timberlands, to the eastern lowlands along the Mississippi River and the Arkansas Delta. Arkansas is the 29th largest state by area and the 34th most populous state, with a population of just over 3 million at the 2020 census. The capital and the most populous city is Little Rock, Arkansas. In the central part of the state, a hub for transportation, business, culture, and government. The northwestern corner of the state, including the Lafayette, Springdale, Rogers metropolitan area, and Fort Smith metropolitan area, is a population, education, and economic center. The largest city in the state's eastern part is Jonesboro. The largest city in the state's southeastern part is Pine Bluff. Previously part of the French Louisiana and the Louisiana Purchase, the territory of Arkansas was admitted to the Union as the 25th state on June 15th, 1836. Much of the Delta had been developed for cotton plantations, and landowners there largely depended on enslaved African American labor. Unfortunately, slavery did happen. And that's a subject I'm not going to touch on here. For real. In 1861, Arkansas seceded from the United States and joined the Confederate States of America during the American Civil War. And that was the history of Arkansas, pretty much. So, a trigger warning. This story that I'm about to tell you involves violence and murder, so listener discretion is advised. No, this story isn't necessarily paranormal. With that said, let's get into this unsolved case. If you watch the horror movie known as The Town That Dreaded Sundown, whether it be the original or the requel, its story is inspired by true events. The Texarkana Moonlight Murders, a term coined by the contemporary press, was a series of 4 unsolved serial murders and related violent crimes committed in or around the Texarkana region of Arkansas and Texas in the late winter and spring of 1946. Shortly after World War II. Just give you a time frame. They were attributed to an alleged unidentified serial killer known as the Phantom of Texarkana, or simply the Phantom Killer or Phantom Slayer. The hypothetical perpetrator is credited with attacking 8 people, of whom 5 died, in a 10-week period. The attacks occurred at night on weekends between February 22nd and May 3rd, targeting male-female pairs. The first 3 attacks were at lovers' lanes, or quiet stretches of road on the Texas side. The 4th attack occurred at an isolated farmhouse in Arkansas. The murders were reported nationally and internationally by several publications and caused a state of panic in Texarkana throughout the summer. Residents armed themselves and at dusk locked themselves indoors while police patrolled streets and neighborhoods. Stores sold out of guns, ammunition, locks, and many other protective devices. Some youths attempted to bait and ambush the killer. Investigations were conducted at the city, county, state, and federal level. Damn, they brought in everybody. In the course of investigations, there have been shifting opinions by officials over whether the 1st and 4th attacks were committed by the same perpetrator. The prime suspect in the case was Yul Sweeney, a career petty criminal who was linked. Who was linked to the murders primarily by statements from his wife, plus additional circumstantial evidence. After Sweeney's wife refused to testify against him, prosecutors decided against pursuing murder charges. Sweeney was convicted on other charges and sentenced to a long term as a habitual car thief and forger. 2 of the lead investigators believed him to be guilty of the murders. The book, The Phantom Killer: Unlocking the Mystery of the Texarkana Serial Murders, which was written in 2014, concludes that Sweeney is the culprit. Which I feel like, let's pause. I feel like evolving from petty theft and car theft and, maybe a little bit of money forgery, jumping to murder, that's a little extreme. You just wanted to blame the next closest guy, but, you never know. They might have other reasons, besides his wife. Well, I guess his wife talking shit, but that could have been her just being pissed off. Okay, back on track. Where was I? Okay. The events inspired many works, including the 1976 film, The Town That Dreaded Sundown. This film is the basis for much of the subsequent myth and folklore around the murders. Here is the infographic show on YouTube to give details of the attacks.
Friday night, a remote country road outside the city of Texarkana. "I don't want to kill you, fellow, so do what I say," said the man brandishing a gun. He wore a white pillowcase with eye slits cut into it. 24-year-old Jimmy Hollis stared at the man in disbelief. His date, 19-year-old Mary Jean LeRae, clutched Jimmy's arm in terror. The man pointed the gun, ready to fire. Jimmy and Mary Jean followed orders and got out of the car. The city of Texarkana is half in Texas and half in Arkansas. In the 1940s, the city was an odd mix of rural and urban, quiet and bustling. The general mood of the city was peaceful, confident. World War II was over and America was getting back to normal. No one was prepared for the events that occurred during the spring of 1946. The evening began with a double date: Jimmy and Mary Jean and Jimmy's brother Bob and his girlfriend. The 4 of them went to the Strand Theater in downtown Texarkana to see a monster movie, The House of Dracula. After the movie, the couples went their separate ways. Jimmy drove his father's Plymouth to Richmond Road, a remote country road about a mile outside the city. The area was popular with locals as a Lover's Lane. Jimmy and Mary Jean were canoodling when a bright flashlight suddenly shone on them. A creepy stranger in a pillowcase mask armed with a gun demanded that they get out of the car. After a few seconds, they realized this wasn't a prank, so they obeyed him. The masked man then snarled at Jimmy to take off his britches. At first, Jimmy refused, but Mary Jean urged him to comply. Jimmy removed his slacks and stood awkwardly in his boxers. The gunman suddenly slammed his pistol twice into Jimmy's head. A loud cracking sound rang through the air. Mary Jean thought Jimmy had been shot. Later, she would learn that the sound was his skull cracking. The gunman ended up letting Mary Jean go, but then chased her down the street and hit her with the flashlight. When finally he went back toward Jimmy, Mary Jean bolted. She ran about half a mile until she reached a house. She hammered on the door, screaming for help. Thankfully, the residents woke up and called for help. First to arrive at the crime scene was Bowie County Sheriff W.H. Presley and 3 Texarkana patrolmen. The gunman was long gone. Both victims were transported to Texarkana Hospital. Jimmy was in critical condition. He ended up being diagnosed with multiple skull fractures. He would spend the next 3 months receiving treatment for his injuries. Mary Jean was released the next day after receiving stitches for a scalp wound. However, she was deeply traumatized, suffered nightmares, and would ultimately leave the state to live with relatives in Oklahoma. Both Jimmy and Mary Jean were questioned by the police, and their stories were generally consistent except for one detail. Jimmy described their attacker as a 6-foot, tanned white male under 30, while Mary Jean claimed he was a light-skinned black man. The police had no motives and no suspects, although one published report claims that 6 people were arrested and released after questioning. This was the first crime, but it wouldn't be the last. March 24, 1946. A rainy Sunday morning, a remote country road outside the city of Texarkana. Around 8:30 a.m., a motorist passed a 1941 Oldsmobile sedan parked beside Rich Road and saw 2 figures inside who looked like they were asleep. Concerned, he stopped and got out to investigate. He quickly realized the 2 people weren't asleep. They were dead, slumped in pools of blood. He got back in his car and raced to town, where he alerted the city police. The police called Sheriff Presley since the car was parked on county turf, roughly a mile outside city limits. Sheriff Presley, along with Jackson Runnels, chief of police on the Texas side of Texarkana, were first on the scene. They found a man and a woman posed in the back of an Oldsmobile. The man knelt in front of the back seat, his forehead resting on crossed hands which lay on the back seat. The woman was sprawled face down on the back seat. Both victims were fully clothed. Both had been shot in the back of the head with a .32 caliber pistol. Despite the rain, there were huge bloodstains on the ground about 20 feet away from the car. The lack of a gun at the scene ruled out murder-suicide. The blood-stained dirt suggested that the couple had been slain outside, then returned to the car. The victims were soon identified as 29-year-old Richard Griffin and his girlfriend, 17-year-old Polly-Ann Moore. Texarkana's 2 mayors pressed for the crime to be solved quickly. Sheriff Presley and Police Chief Runnels immediately launched a full-scale investigation, collaborating with Arkansas Side Police Chief Richard Giles, the Miller County Sheriff, the Arkansas State Police, and the Texas Department of Public Safety. A Texas Ranger also came to assist in the investigation. Unfortunately, there wasn't a lot to go on. Rain and then morbid locals who came to view the crime scene obliterated any potential evidence. By the end of March, the authorities had questioned some 50 witnesses. The couple had been seen dining at a cafe around 10 p.m. with Griffin's sister Eleanor and her boyfriend the night before, but the authorities couldn't account for their time after that. Though the police didn't notice a connection between the Hollis-LeRae attack on February 22nd and the Griffin-Moore murder on March 24th, some uneasy locals did. However, hysteria had not gripped the city yet. April 14, 1946, Palm Sunday, a remote country road northeast of Texarkana in Nevada County, Arkansas. At 6 a.m., the Weaver family was driving on North Park Road when they spotted a man's body lying on the north shoulder. They quickly drove to the nearest house to call for help. The victim was soon identified as 17-year-old Jimmy Martin of Kilgore, Texas, a town about 105 miles away from Texarkana. Jimmy had been shot 4 times. Investigators soon discovered that Jimmy had been in town visiting friends. The night before, he had a date with 15-year-old Betty Jo Booker. He arranged to pick her up after a dance at the local Veterans of Foreign Wars, or VFW Hall. Betty Jo played saxophone at the dance with a local band, the Rhythmaires. Friends saw the couple leave together. Authorities confirmed that Betty Jo had never made it home. A search started with the local volunteers helping out. Around noon, 3 friends of Betty Jo found the missing girl's body behind a tree near crossroads about 1 3/4 miles from Jimmy's death scene. She'd been shot twice. Jimmy's missing Ford Club Coupe, which had the key in the ignition, was found near the entrance to Spring Lake Park, about 1 1/4 miles away from his body and 3 miles away from Betty Jo's body. Jimmy and Betty Jo had last been seen alive at 2 a.m. on Sunday as they left the VFW Hall. They planned to visit Spring Lake Park, another popular lover's lane. A resident living near Betty Jo's crime scene reported hearing a gunshot around 5:30 a.m. The police found .32 caliber shells and a couple of slugs around Jimmy's car. The FBI FBI joined the investigation as well as more Texas Rangers. FBI ballistics tests would reveal that the shells had microscopic markings matching the weapons used to kill Richard Griffin and Polly Ann Moore. Several fingerprints were collected from the car that didn't belong to Jimmy or Betty Jo. The fingerprints were compared to FBI and local files, but no matches were made. For the third time, authorities had little to go on. A second double murder and the fact that it occurred quickly after the first shocked the town. The death of Betty Jo, well known and well liked, horrified local teens. The nightlife of Texarkana slowed to a crawl. Families set early curfews for their teens and barricaded themselves in their homes. Hardware stores sold out of deadbolt locks, guns, and ammo. Reporters from newspapers around the world descended upon Texarkana. On April 16th, hoping to outsell the competition, the Texarkana Daily News named the city's serial gunman the Phantom Killer. The name caught on and everyone began using it. Since the start, there had been some power struggles between the different law enforcement agencies over information and the best way to proceed with the investigations. The second double murder further intensified pressure on the authorities. They conducted patrols and even had decoys park on lovers' lanes, hoping to catch the killer in the act. But the Phantom never showed. Some 300 persons were detained for questioning, ex-cons, drifters, those with reputations. However, no one could be linked to the crimes. Local groups pledged money to be used as rewards for tips, leading authorities to apprehend the killer. By April 20th, reward money totaling $4,280, or some $60,200 in today's money, had been promised. Tips poured in, but they led nowhere. May 3rd, 1946. Friday evening, the Starks farm about 10 miles northeast of Texarkana. After a hard day's work, 37-year-old Virgil Starks relaxed in his living room armchair with a heating pad tucked behind him to soothe his aching back. He listened to the radio as he read the Texarkana Gazette. His wife, 36-year-old Katie Starks, who had already dressed for bed in a nightgown, lay on the bed in an adjacent room. She suddenly heard a noise and yelled for Virgil to turn down the radio. Then she heard the sound of breaking glass. Thinking that Virgil had dropped something, Katie went to the living room. As she reached the doorway, she saw that Virgil was standing. Suddenly, he slumped back into his chair. Katie raced over to her husband and lifted his head. Blood spilled onto her fingers. Virgil had been shot twice through a window behind him by a gunman standing on the front porch of the Starks' farmhouse. Katie had not seen the shooter or heard gunfire. She ran into the kitchen to call for help. The Starks had an old hand-cranked telephone mounted on the kitchen wall. Katie lifted the receiver, cranked the handle twice, then staggered back as 2 bullets slammed into the left side of her face. Several of her teeth shattered and went skittering across the kitchen floor. Dazed, Katie dropped to her hands and knees. The gunman hammered on a kitchen window trying to get into the house. Katie pushed past her pain, got to her feet, and stumbled through the house to make it out the front door. From there, Katie, barefoot, wearing a blood-soaked nightgown, ran across Highway 67 to a nearby house of her sister and brother-in-law, but they weren't home. So Katie ran another 50 yards to the next house. A few neighbors transported the bleeding, semi-conscious Katie to Michael Meager Memorial Hospital, where she immediately went into surgery. One bullet had pierced Katie's cheek and exited behind her ear. Doctors found another bullet wedged under her tongue. Katie survived her injuries but hadn't seen the gunman and couldn't describe him to police. As soon as they received word of the crime, the police, sheriff, and Texas Rangers quickly descended on the Starks farmhouse to collect evidence, dust for prints, and take pictures. The gunman had clearly gotten in. His footprints were on the linoleum. Katie had left a trail of blood and teeth during her mad dash to escape. When Virgil was shot, his heating pad had shorted out and burst into flames, scorching his chair. It was still smoldering. However, Virgil's corpse wasn't burned because it had fallen to the floor. Disturbingly, investigators found a few bloody handprints, suggesting that the killer had deliberately dipped his hand in Virgil's blood and creepily decorated the wall. No robbery occurred. Cash and Katie's jewelry were left untouched. As law enforcement combed through the evidence, some came to the conclusion that the Starks slaying had been committed by a different criminal. The first 3 crimes had happened on the Texas side of town, while the Starks lived in Arkansas. A .22 instead of a .32 was used, and the killer had changed his MO. Some claimed it was a copycat killing. Also, there were rumors that Virgil had an affair with one of his relatives' wives, and the shooting was revenge. As can be imagined, the latest slaying whipped Texarkana into a frenzy. Rumors spread. Altercations, fights, and shootings rose in the area. Residents' tempers were hair-trigger. Police spent a lot of time investigating tips that led nowhere as people made accusations against anyone they disliked or considered weird. Arkansas State Policeman Max Tackett realized that every time the killer phantom struck, a car had been stolen and then later abandoned. Weeks after the Starks attack, the Texarkana police located a car stolen the same night as the Martin Booker murders. On Friday, June 28th, policeman Tackett staked out the stolen car until someone came back to it. That person turned out to be 21-year-old Peggy Swinney. When arrested and questioned, Peggy revealed that she was a newlywed. Earlier in the day, she had married Ewell Swinney, who had a history of counterfeiting and car theft. Her husband was currently some 25 miles away in Atlanta, Texas, trying to sell another stolen car. The couple had had a stormy, violent relationship and had gone on a cross-country spree of stealing cars and picking up hitchhikers. Within a few days, the police had tracked down Ewell and arrested him for car theft. While being arrested, Ewell made some curious and possibly incriminating statements that suggested he was a murderer. During another interview with Peggy, the police lied, saying that they were holding Ewell for murder. Peggy then confessed that her husband was the Phantom Killer and offered several details about the Martin Booker murders. Police were able to independently verify some of her details. However, Ewell's fingerprints didn't match the prints found at any of the scenes. Peggy's stories kept changing across several more interviews. Police believe she was withholding some facts due to fear of incriminating herself. Eventually, Peggy recanted her original confession. Because she was an unreliable witness and they only had circumstantial evidence, the police couldn't arrest Ewell for murder. Also, by law in 1946, Peggy could not be forced to testify against her husband. But the police could and did charge Ewell with violation of his 1945 parole. Also, he was charged with a third felony for his recent car theft. Ewell was found guilty and on April 18, 1947 sent back to jail for life as a habitual offender. Meanwhile, for most of the summer of 1946, the city of Texarkana remained on high alert and the authorities continued to investigate. Old police files include a list of 1,047 persons of interest that were investigated in the months after the Starks attack. Eventually, as there were no further attacks, outside law enforcement as well as the media slowly withdrew. The public relaxed their vigilance. The Phantom Killer never struck again. Over the next couple of years, a few people involved with the cases would be sent anonymous letters claiming that the wrong man was fingered and the real murderer was still out there. The letters dropped hints, but it's not known if police ever followed up on the leads. After the Supreme Court made judgments in the 1960s which altered the legal rights of criminal defendants, Ewell and thousands of other conflicts disputed their prior convictions. Ewell challenged the courts, saying that his sentence should have been no longer than 10 years and he shouldn't have received the habitual offender charge. Ultimately, after serving 26 years, in 1973, a judge granted Ewell writ of habeas corpus and ordered his release. Sadly, Ewell went back to his criminal ways and was in and out of jail for the next 20 years. He only stopped committing crimes after suffering a stroke. In 1993, a writer researching a book about the Phantom Killer tracked down Ewell Swinney at a Dallas nursing home. Ewell bragged about some of his crimes but angrily denied being the Phantom or having anything to do with the murders. He died the next year at age 77. The Phantom Killer murders are still considered unsolved. Do we finally know the identity of the Zodiac Killer? Was Jack the Ripper part of the royal family?
That just proves that humans are the real monsters. Okay, let's move on from the incredibly dark event or events to something a little less dark. How about another cryptid? In Arkansas folklore, the Fouke monster, also known as the Boggy Creek monster or the swamp stalker, is purported to be an ape-like creature similar to descriptions of Bigfoot that was allegedly sighted in the rural town of Fouke, Arkansas, during the early 1970s. The creature was alleged to have attacked a local family. This creature has become ingrained as part of Arkansas folklore. It has also influenced local culture in Fouke, with some businesses capitalizing on the local lore. Shit. I mean, I wouldn't mind. I would do the same fucking thing. Ain't nothing like using it for a quick buck. Also, stories of the creature influenced the 1972 docudrama horror film The Legend of Boggy Creek, which became the 11th highest grossing film of 1972 and is today considered to be a cult classic. The creature was named by a journalist by the name of Jim Powell, who reported on it for the Texarkana Gazette and the Texarkana Daily News. Various reports between 1971 and 1974 described it as being a large bipedal creature covered in long dark hair. It is estimated to be about 7 feet tall or 2 meters, depending on where you're from, with a weight of 200 to 300 pounds or 110 to 140 kilograms. Later reports claimed that it was far larger, with one witness describing it as 10 feet or 3 meters tall, with an estimated weight of 800 pounds or 360 kilograms. Some accounts describe the fog monster as running swiftly with a galloping gait and swinging its arms in a fashion similar to a monkey. Reports also describe it as having a terrible odor, the odor being described as a combination of a skunk and a wet dog, and as having bright red eyes about the size of silver dollars. A variety of tracks and claw marks have been discovered which are claimed to belong to the creature. One set of footprints reportedly measured 17 inches or 43 centimeters in length and 7 inches or 18 centimeters wide, while another appeared to show feet that only possessed 3 toes. Prior to the 20th century, several alleged sightings in the general area related to a large hairy creature circulated in an 1851 report in the Memphis Inquirer and an 1856 report in Caddo Gazette. Local residents claimed that the creature had roamed the area since 1964, but those sightings had not been reported. Local folklore also holds that the creature could be further traced back to sightings in 1946. Most early sightings were alleged in the region of Jonesville, and the creature was known as the Jonesville Monster during this period. In 1955, the creature was reportedly spotted by a 14-year-old boy who described it as having reddish-brown hair, sniffing the air, and not reacting when it was fired upon with birdshot. However, sorry, I can't stop yawning. Investigator Joe Nickel observed that the description was consistent of a misidentified black bear, Ursus americanus. That's its scientific name, black bear. Let's go back and talk about the sightings of this creature back then. The fog monster first made local headlines in 1971 when it was reported to attack the home of Bobby and Elizabeth Ford on May 2nd, 1971. According to Elizabeth Ford, the creature, which initially thought it was a bear, reached through a screen window that night while she was sleeping on a couch. It was chased away by her husband and his brother, Don. During the alleged encounter, the Fords fired several gunshots at the creature and believed they had hit it, although no traces of blood were found. An extensive search of the area failed to locate the creature, but 3-toed footprints were found close to the house, as well as scratch marks on the porch and damage to a window in the house's siding. According to the Fords, they had heard something moving. Sorry, the wicked yawn. Moving around outside late at night several nights prior, but having lived in the house for less than a week, had never encountered the creature before. The creature was then allegedly sighted again on May 23, 1971, when 3 people, D.C. Woods Jr., Wilma Woods, and Mrs. R.H. Sedgis reported seeing an ape-like creature crossing U.S. Highway 71. More sightings reports were made over the following months by local residents and tourists who found additional footprints. The best-known footprints were found in a soybean field belonging to local filling station owner Scott Keith. They were scrutinized by game warden Carl Gallion, I think that's how you say his name, who was unable to confirm their authenticity. Fuck, that's a big word. But basically determine if they was real or not. Like the Ford prints, they appeared to indicate that the creature had only 3 toes. The incident began to attract substantial interest, having news spread about the Ford sighting. The Little Rock, Arkansas radio station KAAY posted a $1,090 bounty on the creature. Several attempts were made to track the creatures with dogs, but they were unable to follow its scent. When hunters began to take interest in the Fouke monster, Miller County Sheriff Leslie Greer was forced to put a temporary no-guns policy in place in order to preserve. Excuse me, y'all. I just got off work, so I'm a little tired. Preserve public safety. In 1971, 3 people were fined $59 each for filing a fraudulent monster report. Wow. After initial surge of attention, public interest in the creature decreased until it gained national recognition in 1973 when Charles B. Pierce released a docudrama horror film about the creature in 1972, The Legend of Boggy Creek. So pretty much that movie saved the story because people were just like, okay, it happened. We ain't got no proof, and let's just drop it. Then they make that movie, bring it back to it. Now it's a fucking tourist spot. By late 1974, interest had waned again, and sightings all but stopped, only to begin again in March 1978 when tracks were reportedly found by 2 brothers prospecting in Russellville, Arkansas. There were also sightings in Center Ridge, Arkansas. On June 26th of the same year, a sighting was reported in Crossett, Arkansas. During this period, the creature was blamed for missing livestock and attacks on several dogs. Since the initial clusters of sightings during the 1970s, there have been sporadic reports of the creature. In 1991, the creature reportedly seen jumping from a bridge. Okay, so he's suicidal now. There were 40 reported sightings in 1997 and 1998. The creature was reportedly sighted in a dry creek bed 5 miles or 8 kilometers south of Fouke. He's just your favorite neighborhood monster. He's like, hey, what's up, guys? Fuck, guys, I'm sorry. Okay. Still to this day, no one has captured or found this mythical creature. It is still talked about around the town of Fouke. The townsfolk even dedicated a festival to the creature. Man, sorry about the yawning, y'all. Like I said, I just got off. A little tired. But yeah, that's crazy that that creature kept getting sighted like sporadically, like a couple months here. Yeah, you saw it. That's all you heard about. Then it died down a little bit. Oh no, I'm back again. Oh, then it died again, and then I'm back again. Goddamn, dude, just stay in the local spotlight. You're already there. Fuck. Maybe your broke ass can get some help. No, I'm just joking. Very odd story. I remember watching that fucking Legend of Boggy Creek. I haven't seen the second one yet, but yeah, very ahead of its time, I want to say. But yeah, Arkansas is filled with many more stories, just like any other state, but we must move on to California next week. Remember to stay tuned, subscribe, review, follow. I'm on Instagram, Strange States America, the TikTok, Strange States of America, Strange States America at gmail.com. I wanted to make it short. I don't know why it won't let me change it. Let's see. We're on Facebook, Strange States of America. I don't know if I want to do a Twitter. Twitter's an odd place. We can be found on YouTube, Spotify, where you get most of your podcasts from. Be sure to share amongst friends. All kinds of good stuff. Well, I'll see y'all next time. Remember, this is Strange States of America.